Okay, we are live. Welcome to the Hill of Roses, where we come once again to celebrate the best contributors to our individual policy movement for progress, to bring power to people like you. With us today on the program, we're going to be talking to Kara Eastman. She's a congressional candidate from Nebraska's 2nd District. We look forward to talking to her to get to know who she is as a person and what inspired her to run for office. Such a bold endeavor for so many of us that we have to know what was that final straw that said, you know what, I have to put myself into the ring, get to know her policies and dig into what are the top priorities we need to be addressing in this country, and wrap up by talking some tactics of how do we actually accomplish this agenda that we want to get done. So with that being said, I hope you guys will tune in today. And if you enjoy what you hear from Kara, I hope you will go to her website to be able to help her campaign. We'll be sharing that at the end of the video so that you know how that you can help out if you enjoy today's video. So with that being said, let's get into it. Hello, Kara. How you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure to have you on the program. There is so much that I want to get to talk to you today about, but I think the first thing that people have to know is to so many people, it's a crazy endeavor to run for office. I have to know, like, what were you doing before you decided to get into the political arena and run yourself? And what was that final straw where you said, I got to get involved?
Well, I'm a social worker by trade, and I've run nonprofits and mission-based organizations for over 20 years. So right before running for Congress, I was the CEO of a nonprofit here called Omaha Healthy Kids Alliance that I was hired to start. It's a children's environmental health organization. And we focus on green, safe, and healthy housing for kids. And then I was also serving on the board of governors of our community college, which is an elected position. So I was serving in elected office and also running a nonprofit.
Okay, so I have to ask, obviously you've been in this endeavor to help poor and working class individuals be able to get ahead. What made you feel like you had to get involved in politics to be able to do more?
Well, it's funny, when I ran for the board of Metro, people would ask me like, oh, are you going to run for something higher? And I'd say, no, like people like me don't get elected. I have been fighting for low income families, giving a voice to people who normally don't have one, fighting for racial, social, environmental justice my whole career. And I'm pretty outspoken. And I just thought, I don't think. And then obviously 2016 happens and we saw anybody can get elected. So, at least by an electoral college vote. But there were a few key moments that made me decide to run. One was my mother being prescribed a $2,500 pill in 2016 that she couldn't afford to take, and that was during her 5th diagnosis with cancer. And my husband, who is a history professor at Creighton University, we just started talking about healthcare and how disgraceful it is that my mother would be prescribed such an expensive pill, one pill, $2,500. And then, we just started kind of exploring this option of, what it would look like if somebody who actually wanted to work on healthcare and fight for healthcare were to run for office in this district. And, we've had some great successes. I mean, I'm really proud to be running, but obviously the election of Donald Trump was certainly an impetus, because what we saw was just, I felt like at running this nonprofit that I had built, something that I raised $13 million to invest in housing for kids in Omaha, and just started thinking about and seeing all the potential for the unraveling of all the work that I had done, from environmental protections to cuts at HUD to putting a ridiculous person in the charge of HUD. Just the need to, like, I'm just not somebody who could sit back and watch that happen.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. I think we understand that there is certainly a lot more that government can do than any individual nonprofit on its own. And so you're right, when the scalability of the problem is as large as it is, and we're seeing dysfunction enter government and people we didn't think being able to win office doing so. I personally credit AOC for making me have that light bulb moment more, because Donald Trump being a billionaire, I was not as surprised about him being able to have some prosperity in a race. I wholeheartedly agree. It's time to step up. So I'd love to touch on a couple of those subjects that you mentioned of pain points. Let's start with healthcare. What was the solution you came to? Was it something around Medicare for all on the insurance side, or did you focus more on the drug side when you've been trying to talk to voters?
Yeah, well, I mean, so obviously, as I mentioned, I'm running because of my mother's own prescription issues, and in telling that story, people talk to me every day in the district, around the country, about their prescriptions. I talked to a family just the other day; they're paying $11,000 a month for their kids' medication. This is unbelievable. And so, even working backwards, right? Just recently, there was a bill before the House to expand the Affordable Care Act. My opponent voted against it, which voted against protections for pre-existing conditions, which voted against lowering prescription costs. And this is in the middle of this pandemic, right? So he's fundamentally against expanding healthcare. And yet the voters in Nebraska voted to expand Medicaid in 2018 on the ballot. So, and he's been out of touch with that. When it comes to healthcare in this country, there are a number of ways that we could be doing things better. And I support a universal healthcare system. I mean, we know that there are bills before Congress. The one that I personally like is HR 1384, that would expand healthcare, eliminate copays, premiums, out-of-pocket costs, and save the federal government $2 trillion over the next decade. We need to be exploring those kinds of solutions that actually save money, because what we know is it could happen, right, is that there's support for healthcare reform on both sides. But what will continue to happen is that the Republicans will say that they support certain options. And then once the fiscal note comes out about it, they'll say, nope, see, look, it's going to actually cost us more, so we can't afford it. Yeah. So we need to be exploring options that save the federal government money and are the best options for getting people health care. Unions know this the best. When we have everybody in a pool, we have that collective bargaining power of the government, and everybody has health care, we would see savings across the board, and also everybody would be a lot healthier.
So I'd love to ask how you try and broach that specific topic in what is considered purple territory. Like, one thing I had noted in how you were describing that, you didn't want to use necessarily Medicare for all. You tried to use HR 1384. And I'd love to hear just like how you try and message this to those voters, because when you look at the polling, this is something that is actually bipartisan. But when you look at the actual politicians, it's clear that Democrats favor, expanding healthcare. Some not as much as we need, but Republicans are trying to regress that. How have you been trying to message on this issue specifically to independents and Republicans?
Well, you just heard it, and it's not avoiding anything. It's talking about this in a way that makes sense to people. When we say Medicare for all, people have all kinds of ideas about this. They're like, well, is that single payer? Is that universal? Is that public option? What does that exactly mean? People talk about the existing problems with Medicare, not covering vision, dental, hearing, long-term care. So immediately all these things come up. Then you get the whole propaganda that's been unleashed against the idea from the pharmaceutical companies, from the insurance companies, from the Republicans, and honestly from some Democrats, trying to make people think that this isn't the right system, because so many people rely on that funding from those companies to run their campaigns, like my opponent. And because the bottom line for the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies is so significant. I mean, they make so much money off of us being sick that they don't benefit if we actually expand healthcare. So I try to be as honest, I tell people what I think, but I'm also, trying to explain to people, having talked to economists, healthcare professionals, medical providers, all the information that we've been ascertaining, to try to be as knowledgeable about this issue as possible, and at the same time run a campaign and try to win. So, I try to be honest with people. I also want to acknowledge people's fears. It sounds really scary that I wake up tomorrow and suddenly your healthcare provider's they think you're not going to have choice. They don't have choice right now.
Yeah.
Your in-network, out-of-network stuff makes no sense to anybody. And for a lot of people, you go to the hospital, you go to the emergency room, and that hospital might be in your network, but the provider isn't, and then you get hit with a surprise bill. So there's so much misinformation out there. There are things that people need to understand, but I'm also trying to win a race here in the heartland. And so, it's been a tough balance, but I think voters appreciate my honesty and frankness about this. And to be honest, most people get this. I mean, once we explain it within 2 or 3 sentences, people are like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I've had people come to me and say, since the pandemic, we've seen that maybe tying healthcare to employment, not the smartest idea.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you that you can't run away from what are the common sense solutions just because of electability. You still need to stand firm that this is the best solution that we have currently. But you're right. You do have to speak to people's concerns, valid or not. It's important to make them feel like, hey, you're not crazy for being a little nervous of change, but let's show you the facts so you feel a little bit more at ease. I'd love to hear, just talking on the drug side specifically. I wanted to hear, are there other things on top of Medicare for All that you would be looking to try and implement? There are certainly the people who have said we got to import drugs. There's price cost fixing. There's potentially the idea of public manufacturing. What are some of those things that you're looking to do beyond Medicare for All? Or do you think Medicare for All, enabling that negotiating power, is sufficient?
Well, I think it would be sufficient, but I mean, because we're not going to get there immediately, we need to do some things to address this issue now. And so changing the law to allow the federal government to negotiate prices would be one step in the right direction. It's crazy. I have a campaign team member who drove to Mexico to get a prescription. This was just last year because her prescription cost went up so much. And we hear this all the time, right? Of people going to Canada or going to Mexico to get prescriptions.
Yeah.
So why is it that it's more affordable there? Well, there's a lot of answers to those questions, but it's crazy, and we need to fix it.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you there. And I think for the people who tend to actually be Democrats who feel like the existing like Medicaid and Medicare systems are sufficient, I'll tell you, as someone who is 26, currently out of work, going through the open enrollment process, you are not having that freedom of choice of your doctors. The plans do not cover all of the providers that you are looking for. A universal healthcare system is going to streamline that administration. And as you said before, it's fiscally sound. We've had many meta-analysis studies show $5 trillion in savings over 10 years. And the bottom line is that most people are going to have a significant amount of predictability in their healthcare too. I know for a fact during this COVID crisis, there have been a ton of headlines that have said insurance rates are going up somewhere between like 30 and 40% on average. So this is the predictable solution that we can all count on. With that being said, I'd love to hear some of the other priorities you would be trying to bring to Congress. Obviously, it's a 2-year term. I think Medicare for All is sadly going to be a little bit longer than that fight. I'm a little bit pessimistic, I'll be honest. So what were the first few things that you would be trying to prioritize when you immediately come into Congress?
Well, unfortunately, with the pandemic, that's going to have to be priority one for anybody in Congress or who wins a seat. And we're going to have to get people back to work, but back to work safely. And, we right now, I mean, I'm pleased to see that that Congress and the government are trying to step in and solve some of the problems. But, frankly, the Trump administration is also creating some of them. So,
yeah.
So there's that problem. But, we have been talking to business owners, especially local independent business owners in our district, and they're terrified of what's next. It's predicted that 85% of local independent restaurants aren't going to make it through the year. And that's 85%. It's crazy. And that's an issue that's near and dear to my heart. I, eat mostly at local independent places and have a lot of friends who own those businesses. One of our friends who owns a restaurant here, owns 2 restaurants here, last night said, he didn't go into this business to like make it. He kind of pulled himself up, started these restaurants on his own, was fulfilling the American dream, and now he doesn't know what's going to happen, and therefore, this is not just this isn't just work to him. This is his life. The restaurant's named after him. I mean, he loves these places. His family's work there. He and his wife open these restaurants together. We're going to have to fix this, and at the same time, we're going to have to save human lives. And so that's going to have to be priority one. The other priority for me, and I think this is, is restoring democracy. And that happens in a number of ways. One, I want to work on getting money out of politics. For somebody who came into this as a non-millionaire, it's crazy that the amount of money that you have to have access to or to raise in order to be competitive. And the only measure of viability for a candidate is how much money you can raise. I come from a fundraising background and we've worked really hard, but I don't, most of my friends are not millionaires. Actually, I don't think any of them are. And so I come, my friends helped out, but they're generous, but it's really tough. And that, then there's also the issue of gerrymandering, which our district was victimized by in 2010. Whatever party is in power doesn't necessarily want to do something about because they benefit from it, but we have to work on voter suppression. There were 500,000 ballots that were rejected in the primary this year. We're going to have to address this. There's efforts to keep people from voting by mail, that we're seeing coming from the Trump administration that are going to have to be fixed. Some of these things were there before Trump was in office. So this to me is incredibly important in terms of moving things forward and actually engaging people in voting, because there's so many people that are just completely disillusioned.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with both those priorities. First and foremost, you can't be trying to just aim for long-term solutions when you're in the middle of a crisis. You have to address the immediate pain on the ground. And I'd love to dig into that in a moment. But on the democracy side, that is vital. It's one of our top 3 priorities here at the Hill of Roses. And so I'd love to dig in just a little bit on that, of not just addressing what are the issues within our democracy, but how do we start actually solving them? And I'll touch on first that money in politics, because you're so right. It is so important to address. Right now, when you look at congressional races, 91% of races are won by whoever fundraises more. So at the end of the day, this is the thing we got to address in the room. And a lot of people obviously bring up Citizens United or what's the other one? Valero. I'm blanking on the name, but the corporate personhood that we've established within our democracy. And so I'd love to hear, in your opinion, how do we address money in politics? Because I think an amendment is going to be a tall task to ask for, at least at this exact moment. How do you think we can start breaching this problem?
Yeah, well, there are some cities and states that have started on this path of publicly financed campaigns, working to find ways to get, campaigns to be less expensive for people. So I think that's one of the ways we do it. I don't take corporate PAC money in my campaign, and that certainly would be, the perception would be that would put me in a disadvantage. And yet I have, last time I outraised the incumbent. I just outraised him in the last quarter by $200,000. So, I think there's a movement afront of candidates who are interested in fixing this problem. And I think that's one of the ways we do it. I mean, I'm proudly endorsed by Citizens United, and, would love to work on this. I think you're right that an amendment might be challenging, but we need members of Congress to step up and say, we actually want to change the system, because right now it is so skewed towards the very wealthy. And when the average net worth of somebody in Congress is $1 million, I just think they have a hard time relating to regular working people.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. And I do think that the public financing is a really strong step. Do you support initiatives like democracy dollars, like these voucher programs? Because obviously there can be multiple definitions to how people interpret public financing. Some say we're simply giving people money to be able to finance the campaigns. Some say it's solely financing it based on like only individual contributors, not these PACs. What does public financing mean to you, at least from a federal level?
Well, I like you said, there are a number of proposals out there of how we would do this, but my thing is more about like who's benefiting from these dollars and who's benefiting from this system. And if we look at a campaign like mine, it's about a $3 million race. Still, like, trust me, I know how crazy that is, $3 million. But it's mostly spent on TV and mail, right? And we spend actually quite a lot on field people, like investing in people who are actually making contact with voters. And originally, I mean, frankly, we were criticized for it, like saying, no, you got to reserve all that money for TV and mail. There are other ways we could be doing that, right? Like public debates, open the airways so we can have these public debates, right? There's some solutions out there that just would be a little bit more creative and also would get to what people want to hear. People want to hear the two candidates actually putting out ideas and debating them. I mean, right now we don't even really have debates. We have these sort of like moderated discussions. And so I would actually like to debate my opponent, and not just to have a 1-minute sentence about, in his case, it's always like a canned response that he's been handed by the Republican Party. I would actually like to debate him on the issues because he believes in taking away healthcare from people. He believes in taking away women's reproductive justice. He's going to have to explain to voters how that's okay.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And I honestly think there should be a requirement in every race that there is some form of debate. We have that basically as a standard for our, presidential elections, but we got to start bringing that standard down ballot. Honest conversation is the only way we're going to be able to grapple with these issues and not become further divided. But going back to the point I said beforehand, you obviously were right in that first priority. We have to address the immediate crises that are facing our nation. And I'd love to hear what is in that package beyond, obviously, we talked healthcare beforehand. What else do you think the people need as support while they're going through these times?
Well, what we've seen, right, is that as usual, Congress as a whole, when they started actually developing the stimulus packages, they start with bailing out large corporations. We saw that there were places, companies that got money that didn't need it, even individuals who got money that didn't need it. Then we have the issue that, with the PPP, that's going to have to be paid back. So again, my friend, the restaurant owner, said last night, if he has to pay that back, he's going under. He can't afford it. So we need to flip that model. We need to actually start with families who are struggling, with individuals who've lost their jobs, with local independent businesses and restaurants, small businesses, and then work our way up. And look, I mean, I understand, of course, that corporations provide jobs to a number of people, but at the same time, thank you, my husband's bringing me water. But at the same time, like we have to understand the people that aren't going to make it. And look, I've been working in blighted communities in our city for a long time. They've been ignored by politicians. They've been ignored by investment. Well, what happens after the pandemic? Those are not going to be the priority for most people. It's going to be bailing out the suburbs, bailing out the wealthier communities. And so we need to change that. And we need members of Congress who are going to be willing to stand up and say, no, the first people who get help are the people who need it the most.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you on that approach. I'd love to now kind of take that tactics. Like, for example, the CARES Act was passed universally, despite it being basically a 4.5 trillion bailout to corporations and around 200 billion for the people. Would you have supported that bill if you were in Congress at the time?
Yeah, I mean, I would have liked to have seen more, right? But at this time, not supporting a bill that actually helps people would be pretty tough. But I would have been a louder voice. So with the CARES Act, here's the problem. My opponent didn't fight hard enough for this district. There was a population cutoff for the amount of money that you got. If you were under 500,000, you got, in Omaha, we got 25 million. Atlanta, which has about 570,000 people, got 85 million. So there was an arbitrary cutoff in population. My opponent should have chained himself into the walls, into the radiator in Congress, and demanded that they lower that population requirement to 450,000 so that we could have gotten the same amount of money as Atlanta, because we missed out. So this is where I think we just need somebody who's actually going to be willing to roll up her sleeves and get to work.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you. It is a very tough decision to say no to a package when people are completely struggling out there. I'd love to hear, in terms of tactics, what you think the progressive movement should have been doing in that bill specifically, because I think a lot of people felt kind of let down by that we had yet another bailout like that, just like we had in 2008. How do you think the Progressive Caucus could have been handling that bill negotiation better?
No, I think they handled it really well. I mean,
okay.
They're just also outnumbered. So there's that. But this is where we have a chance to build a broader coalition and really start. I mean, this is why it's so important for us to expand the House majority. Yeah. And I know a lot of people are focused on flipping the Senate. wonderful, as we should. We need to do that. We obviously need to flip the presidency, but we need to expand the House majority so that we can get some of these good policies passed in our country.
And so before we get all this democracy reform that we were just talking about beforehand is so vital, how do you think the progressive movement can kind of grow and overcome these hurdles? Like, for example, what were the biggest hurdles you've been trying to overcome in your own race that we could be doing a little bit better?
Well, so one of the reasons why I support, well, a couple of reasons that I support the progressive policy agenda is one, these ideas, these policies are supported by the vast majority of Americans.
Yeah.
And I don't think we hear that enough. Like, so my opponent likes to paint me as radical, right? That's the word they use for anybody who's running as a Democrat. I mean, they're calling Joe Biden a radical socialist. So, I'm in that camp with him. But it's ridiculous. He is so extreme. Again, but so he voted against the Violence Against Women Act, voted against the ratification of the ERA, voted to repeal healthcare. He was notorious for saying not just yes, but hell yes to repealing the Affordable Care Act. Those are really extreme positions for someone to be taking, especially in a swing district. So I believe that the more we talk about how popular these policies are, 90% of Americans supporting common sense gun safety regulation like universal background checks, 70% of Americans now supporting Medicare for all. A majority of Americans supporting having a livable wage. These are not radical ideas. They make sense, and they're within the mainstream of America. I think the problem is the media, the mainstream media, and the political parties try to divide us on these issues when we mostly agree. And then I also think that, from looking at this from an economic standpoint, progressive policies actually save money. If we focus on investments in prevention, we save money. And as somebody who's run a nonprofit where I had to prove return on investment to funders, I believe the federal government should start operating that way. And when we talk about prevention, when we talk about investing in public health up front, when we talk about investing in education up front, having universal pre-K so that our students are able to actually then graduate from high school, go on to college, get a job. This is how we compete in a global economy. I mean, these are not radical ideas. They make so much sense and they save money.
I do agree with you on that. I wonder, like, should we be even framing it as like progressive? Like, if we have this wide support for this issue, wouldn't that be considered the moderate position? Like, at the end of the day,
Yeah.
I'm wondering, in your opinion, do you think the progressives have like a messaging problem? Because, I don't hate socialism. I don't happen to be a socialist myself. But I think a lot of people, when they hear the term, start thinking of authoritarianism because we do have an older generation very conditioned to the Cold War. Like, do you think there's anything the progressive movement needs to be doing better on messaging to be able to reach more voters?
Well, this is, the Democratic Party as a whole, on the spectrum has a messaging problem. I mean, we've seen that. And the Republicans just have been doing this better. And they're able to use scare tactics and certain buzzwords. And then they're also able to take words that we grab onto and then flip them and make them, nefarious in people's minds. So, but I think what's really interesting is exactly what you said. Like, these are moderate positions to take.
Yeah.
People believe that healthcare is a right. Like, most people believe that. And when we look at the Democrats, even if you take the Democratic primary debates for president, the Democrats were like from here to here on issues, but the Republicans are way over here.
Yeah.
And I think we need to start calling that out as radical and extreme. And for somebody like my opponent, again, representing a swing district, we're about split Republican and Democrat here. About a quarter of the district are registered independents. His voting record has been 94% with Donald Trump and the Republican Party. That is really extreme. That is a completely partisan dude that's in that office that needs to go.
So the last question I have before I go to my favorite question that I've gotten from the audience so far is, I wanted to hear, in your opinion, what do you think is the biggest strength of the district that you're serving in that you feel like you can build on top of? Like, what are the strengths that you feel like can be even stronger?
Well, one, we are a pretty diverse district. And so I think when people think of Nebraska, you don't necessarily think like, oh, there's, like, some people don't even know we have streetlights and ethnic food. So there's that. But, we in this district, we are 13% African American, 12% Latino. We have a huge refugee population, people from Somalia and South Sudan. So that's one of the things that we need to bring to light more, is to get people to understand the robust diversity in our district that's incredible, and it's an amazing place. The other thing is that Omaha in itself is actually, in a lot of ways, you know, economically better than, we fare better than some other big cities. I guess we're considered a small big city. There, unemployment here is lower than the national average usually. Now, I will put a caveat on that and say that's true if you're white, because African American unemployment is double that of white people in our city. So there are some things that we do really well and other things that we need to do so much better.
Okay. Well, Kara, I want to thank you so much for answering my questions. Let's go to the one question I had from the audience that I particularly liked. I think this goes very well into the conversation we were having beforehand on messaging. Falco in general just wanted to know what your general feelings have been about the RNC convention, and I'll add on how you've been feeling about the Democratic convention. Have you been watching?
Yeah. I enjoyed it's such an adjustment, right, to get used to the convention being this way. I enjoyed the Democratic convention. I mean, I thought on some levels it was inspiring and exciting. The RNC, actually, we've been, the first night we were live tweeting during it and just trying to point out, okay, like, well, this sounds reasonable. We didn't really find anything that we could point to that sounded too reasonable. There's so much misinformation being put out. The amount of fact checking that they're having to do is just crazy. And it got to the point where I was asked yesterday, like, what am I expecting from last night? And I put up a picture of my cat on Twitter. So I was just like, I don't even know what to say. I mean, it's propaganda. It is pure propaganda. And unfortunately, there are people who are struggling, who are watching that and believe it. And, I think we should all be doing whatever we can to change that, because Americans do not deserve to be lied to. And it's so un-American and so unpatriotic. And to put it out there as those things is the most un-American thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And I think one thing of note, it's kind of been brushed to the side. Obviously, Democrats have been focusing on it, but like what the Hatch Act is and how they've basically co-opted the White House for use of campaign events. It brings up the question of, like, obviously we have laws in the books and we obviously have this big law enforcement problem going on in the nation. How do we enforce these things when it feels like there's just a blatant disregard for the rules of the land when it comes to these people in these powerful offices? You look at even, like, for example, the FEC right now doesn't even have quorum to be able to do enforcement at the moment. How do we try and fix this problem where the laws get overly punitive to those that are poor and often brown and black, and to those in power, well, we have laws, but they're not being enforced, so who cares?
Yeah, and I mean, look, this is, there are presidents before Donald Trump that did things that a lot of us didn't like, right? But we've never seen anything like this, where there's blatant breaches of federal laws pushed in our face nightly.
Yeah.
So the easy answer is we have to get this president out of office. I mean, we just absolutely have to. Then we've got messes to clean up, because we don't want another president to feel like this is okay. And obviously there's going to be different standards if we, when we have Joe Biden in office. I mean, imagine if Biden would do the stuff that Trump is doing. Imagine if Obama had done them. I mean, so there's a double standard here, and we need to rectify that. And the thing that I like about Joe Biden and that I like about Kamala Harris is I do believe that together they have a power to unify people, because we need healing, we need leadership, we need health, we need safety, we need facts, we need science. There's just so much that has been dismantled with this presidency, and we all just also need a break. Like, we want to make politics boring again.
Yeah, I mean, I have some mixed feelings on that, because you're right. We're going to have messes we got to clean up, and we got to stay active, because, obviously it's not good enough just to gain power. We got to start doing the things, and that's going to cause people to need to get involved. Yeah. So I have mixed feelings about that. I totally get it because I feel fatigued all the time being like, what's going to happen now on social media? Some big announcement by the president that basically disregards all the rules of the law or norms. And it's just like, you're right. We do need to get him out of office, but I don't want people to feel like politics is boring. I want to keep politics fun. That's the thing. I don't want politics to be boring. I want it to be fun. And I think that's what we got to do.
Well, my point about that though is that like I'm running for a position to help run the government. Like that's pretty cut and dry. And yet what's happened is like congressional races are popularity contests that people decide if they're voting for you based on what you're wearing or what you said once, or I mean,
voters do not care about policy as much as we'd like right now.
Well, and to me, that's a problem because you should want the person who's the best qualified to make rational decisions running your government, not somebody who's just able to like, make you feel like you want to have a drink with that person. Although I am pretty fun to have a drink with.
Yes, so, I would love to have shared a drink with you today, Kara. But I want to thank you so much for being able to answer my questions as well as the audience's. For those that want to be able to support the campaign, how can they get involved and where should they go check you out?
Sure. Well, our website's eastmanforcongress.com. We're obviously all over social media on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And we're always looking for people. I mean, now we have people all over phone banking for us. So we welcome anybody who wants to sign up on our website. And obviously, just like any other campaign, we need money. Our grassroots campaign is funded by regular people donating small dollars all over the country. Our average donation is about $15, and I'm proud of that. So we'd welcome anyone to help in whatever way you feel like you can.
Well, Kara, I hope people will come support you. This is a race that is winnable. I honestly believe that wholeheartedly. So we are wishing you the best of luck in the days ahead, and we hope people will help support you. So thank you so much for taking the time with us today to be able to talk about your campaign.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.
Okay, everyone, that was Kara Eastman. As you see at the bottom of our page, we have her website, eastmanforcongress.com. So please consider going and supporting her campaign if you liked what you heard today. With that being said, let's go through our programming updates. For the rest of the week, we got only one more thing. It's Thursday. We're so close to the weekend, finally. So Friday, we're talking with Carol Earl. She is a spokesperson for the Movement for a People's Party. They have a convention coming up on this Sunday. And so we're going to be talking to her about what this new party is, what is the strategy for how this party is going to succeed, where, other left-wing parties like the Green Party have fallen a little bit short, and so much more. So please tune in again tomorrow. We're going to be at 8 p.m. Eastern time. And then next week, we'll be back to our normal times because the hell that is this RNC convention will be over, and we will now be back at our 9 p.m. Eastern time slot. So with that being said, if you like today's video, make sure you like it. If you want to make sure that Kara's campaign succeeds, as I said, go to her website, but also share this video. And if you want to make sure that you're notified whenever we are coming out with videos, please make sure that you subscribe and hit the bell down below. With that being said, my friends, I hope you all are staying safe out there. I love you guys, as always, for fighting for the movement. And as you know, I want you guys to stay rosy out there because, God, we need a little bit more positivity in the world. So, as always, thank you so much for tuning in.